You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Remember what we did with the RNC? Well, we're going to do the exact same damn thing with the DNC. In fact, night one, heavy hitters right now on the stage is former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Let's drop in and see what she's talking about.
We're not just electing a president, we're uplifting our nation. We're opening the promise of America wide enough for everyone. Together, we put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling. And tonight, so close to breaking through once and for all, I want to tell you what I see through all those cracks and why it matters for each and every one of us. What do I see? I see freedom. I see the freedom to make our own decisions about our health, our lives, our loves, our families. The freedom to work with dignity and prosper, to worship as we choose or not, to speak our minds freely and honestly. I see freedom from fear and intimidation, from violence and injustice, from chaos and corruption. I see the freedom to look our children in the eye and say, in America, you can go as far as your hard work and talent will take you, and mean it. And you know what? On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States. My friends, when a barrier falls for one of us, it falls and clears the way for all of us. So for the next 78 days, we need to work harder than we ever have. We need to beat back the dangers that Trump and his allies pose to the rule of law and our way of life. Don't get distracted or complacent. Talk to your friends and neighbors. Volunteer. Be proud champions for the truth and for the country that we all love. I want my grandchildren and their grandchildren to know I was here at this moment, that we were here, and that we were with Kamala Harris every step of the way. This is our time, America. This is when we stand up. This is when we break through. The future is here. It's in our grasp. Let's go win it.
That was former Secretary of State, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton addressing the DNC. We'll be bouncing in and out. The first night, well, let me back up. I remember when I think it was second grade because it was second grade because it was Mrs. Cochran's class. And she, bless her heart, to her credit, she was the one who made it a point of teaching basically government to second graders. We were learning about Carter versus Ford and how we would elect a president. And I remember thinking, wow, this is so interesting, at least in a second grader's mind. But I can pinpoint that time, that was the moment I think I started to fall in love with the American political process. Of course, it doesn't look like that now, but I'm saying back then it sparked this interest in me. And because it was later that year during that same election, I was watching the DNC and the RNC for the first time. But I remember watching the DNC and I was mesmerized by the keynote speaker night one. And the keynote speaker night one is usually someone who's really, really talented as an orator, possibly a future leader or presidential hopeful in the party. So the night one keynote speaker in a conventional cycle would have someone who's going to set the tone. And there was this speaker, the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan, one of the best orators I have ever heard. If I could do anything 1/10 of what she did that night or what she did during Nixon pre-impeachment hearings, one of the greatest orators ever. But it sparked my interest in just following politics and how I fell in love with it to this day. And I haven't missed an RNC or a DNC, at least on TV, ever since. And this is a night, I think, where we can actually celebrate, as we did a month ago, celebrate how we go about electing a president in this country. And I know it's real easy to be partisan. It's real easy to be cynical. But if you take a step back and take your personal desires out of it, you should be just kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool. How the country, regardless of your political stripes, is coming together to choose our next leader. It's not often that you have a sitting president who's not running for re-election. You usually have an incumbent or a two-term president who's termed out. But this is where I said this earlier today in my television hit. We're living through extraordinary times. And if you don't realize it, then you don't grasp the enormity of the moment, the magnitude of the moment. And we are living through history. The idea of an incumbent president 4 months before the election stepping aside and VP stepping up. We had something similar in 1968 with President LBJ and Humphrey, but not like this. It was much more contentious. The Democratic Party, they basically had a fight, a war on the floor of the convention as far as nominating someone else. That's not what's happening here in Chicago. But I would say really pay attention to how this process is coming together, regardless of who you're rooting for. And we will be listening to some of the heavy hitters. Not often do you have three presidents or former presidents speaking at one convention. It's just unheard of. And you would have had four if President Carter wasn't on his literal deathbed. So that's something can be historic and you don't have to like it. Just know that we are living through history. Some of the big heavy hitters tonight in day one: Shawn Fain, president of the United Auto Workers Union. Of course, you heard Secretary Clinton. The First Lady, Joe Biden, will be speaking. And the keynote, which is really odd, you don't have a sitting president do a keynote. Usually the sitting president is the person that you're renominating, which on the final night, which is customarily Thursday. But to have Joe Biden speaking the first night tells you how unusual all of this is. And we'll bring that to you later on. I have some other thoughts about our political process, where we are at this time in America, and so much more. I don't get to talk as much politics here on Later with Mo Kelly. I usually do it for my other properties. You might have seen me on Spectrum. No, you didn't see me on Spectrum because you were all asleep. I was on Spectrum at 6:30 in the morning, bleary-eyed. It's just, woo. This day cannot end soon enough. That was only like 12 hours ago.
Come on, we're just getting started. What are you talking about?
I know. We'll have more in just a moment. This is Later with Mo Kelly, KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
Yes, the DNC is going right now. Just in case you didn't know, KFI's own Gary and Shannon are broadcasting live all this week from the city of Chicago, covering the DNC. I'm just playing around the periphery. We will drop in and out of the convention, but it got me nostalgic for when I was growing up and fell in love with the American political process. Before we had all this partisanship, or the different type of partisanship that we have today, it was a much more civil time. It was a much more conventional time. That's the word I would use. And you got to learn the process as far as how, in a party sense, we go about choosing our eventual president. And oftentimes I hear from people like, we need to have more parties. We need to have more than a two-party system. We've always had more than two parties. You don't think the Green Party's a party? Do you remember the Constitution Party? What about peace and freedom? Oh, Ross Perot, when he was running as an independent, for a while he was part of the Reform Party. And if you really want to go back, Strom Thurmond and the Dixiecrats. Of course, the Libertarian Party, the Alliance Party, if you really want to dig in the weeds. My point is we've always had other options. So why is it we always end up with a Republican or a Democrat? Well, it's pretty simple. It's because those parties have infrastructure. Those parties have people on the ground who are working to get people elected at off levels in government other than just president. You notice you never heard about a Green Party candidate for governor. You never heard about a Green Party candidate for mayor or, I don't know, comptroller, insurance commissioner, because they're not a functioning party on that level. They will have their convention, air quotes, where they'll go to, I don't know, a Holiday Inn somewhere in San Diego on a Friday night. They'll get liquored up, have a raging kegger, and then they'll come out Sunday and say, Jill Stein is our nominee. You ever notice that? They don't have an actual primary. Why? Because parties get to choose their nominees however they want. The whole primary system, a lot of people don't know or they don't remember. It did not include all 50 states until well into the 1970s. And it wasn't even both parties at that point. The primaries are just a marketing survey. For a lot of the 20th century, they just had, a few states. They would just say, hey, you very important states, what do you think about this person or that person? And they come up with a nominee. Now the selection process is much more comprehensive. You got all 50 states. And then they start tweaking the rules about who's allowed to vote in the primaries. Well, it's a closed primary, so you have to be a registered Republican. It's a closed primary. You have to be a registered Democrat. You independents, you can't vote in these primaries. Like in California, it's a closed primary. I'm an independent. I can't vote in the presidential primaries. So, they don't want to hear what I have to say. But it's evolved. And it's a marketing survey. And I've used this analogy before, but I think it still holds. It's like these parties are private corporations. Call it McDonald's, call it Dervina Snitzel. McDonald's, they do what? They sell hamburgers. Now, they may ask you, they may email you and say, hey, what do you think about us selling, I don't know, hot dogs? And they'll go around and they'll ask Mark Ronald, they'll ask Stephen, they'll ask me, they'll ask Tuwala. They may even ask Chris Little, of all people. They may ask Chris Little, hey, what do you think about selling hot dogs at McDonald's? And let's say, hypothetically, all of us say, you damn right, I want to eat hot dogs at McDonald's. You know what McDonald's is going to do? They're going to say, okay, thank you for, you're filling out the survey. Thank you for your time. Here's a free coupon for a filet of fish. But since we're McDonald's, we're going to just go ahead and stick with hamburgers. Maybe we'll even sell some chicken nuggets. And you may think, what? You asked us. Yes, but it's just an opinion survey. That's what primaries are. That's how they can change the rules. That's how they can have someone like Joe Biden be forced out and step aside. And then Kamala Harris, talking about tonight, can step right in. You say, oh, my gosh, you've undermined democracy. No, it is a private marketing survey. It's not a public election. People don't understand how their own country works or their own party works, for that matter. That's why the Democrats can do what they've done. And no, you can't sue, because they've already written this into the bylaws for the eventuality just like this. You can say delegates, super delegates, whatever. You can say it's rigged. You can say it's fixed. No, it's actually a private corporation working in its own best interests. And its own best interests were to win the election. And they knew that if we have Joe Biden in November, we're going to get our asses kicked. So they made a corporate decision and said, Joe, we need you to step aside for the good of the party. But I don't want to step aside. Joe, we need you to step aside for the good of the party. It's not just you. It's about down ballot races. We're going to lose the House. We're going to lose the Senate. We're going to lose the Oval Office if your old ass is on the ballot in November. That's why we are here where we are. And it's not very different. I was talking about the Green Party, how they went to the hotel Holiday Inn in San Diego for the weekend. It's not very different from that. Parties get to choose their candidate however they see fit. The rules for the Republicans are not the same as the rules for the Democrats. And when you opt in, as in you register as a Democrat or you register as a Republican, then, you're going to like the rules or you're not going to like the rules, but the rules are the rules. Them's the rules, as they say. And they created them for the benefit of the party. And remember how they pushed Hillary Clinton's side when Barack Obama was running. It seemed like he was going to win, but it was neck and neck down to the end. It could have been a contested convention. And then the party leadership went to Hillary and said, Hills, for the good of the party, we need you to step aside because we need to have a unified convention. And Hillary said, I don't want to step aside. I have a chance I can still win this. No, but it will create party friction and we'd have a brokered convention and we can't have that going into the election. There are all sorts of examples like this. Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. They said, Bernie, we need you to step aside. It's got to be Hillary. Got to have a united party. This is not unusual. The only thing unusual is you had a sitting president 4 months before the election, and they pushed him aside. But that's how parties work. These aren't public elections. It's not like you're saying, you're making my vote not matter. It never did matter. It's McDonald's. It's Der Wiener Schnitzel. Now, on the other hand, you can say Der Wiener Schnitzel, they try to sell everything. They try to sell hamburgers. They try to sell hot dogs. They sell corn dogs, chili dogs, I think chicken fingers, and it never gets them anywhere. Hey, do they still have that Der Wiener Schnitzel across the street? Are they still open?
Yeah, I think so. And I got to tell you,
I need someone to go because I'm hungry now.
If poli-sci classes were more tube steak based, like the explanations that you're giving right now, everybody would have gotten better grades.
All I'm saying is, if you put it in terms that people kind of understand and relate to, it makes it all better. Now, Stefan, I know you got to work, but during this break, I would like 2 corn dogs and a chili cheese dog, please. I'll pay for it. Okay. You don't like chili cheese dogs? Oh, I know. No, if I had that, I would pay for it, and actually all y'all would pay for it too. But it would taste good going down. Oh my goodness.
It's so good.
Why do you hate yourself? Why?
Don't you eat stuff every now and then because you have a taste for it, and then it reminds you why you don't eat it all the time?
Like that? No, but I guess I understand what you're saying.
That's one of the places like you'll never forget that.
I do have a taste for Der Wiener Schnitzel all the time. I pass it every single day, and I tell myself no every single day.
Good
but there's going to come a day in which I'm going to be weak, and I'm going to give in to the temptation.
Stay strong.
So Der Wiener Schnitzel is good. I don't care what anyone says. That stuff tastes good.
I have never once eaten Der Wiener Schnitzel.
What?
Never once.
Wow.
You half black man have never eaten a Der Wiener Schnitzel?
Wait, how is this a black thing?
Come on, dude.
Well, you got to explain it to me.
Okay, let me just ask. Okay, have you ever eaten at Church's Fried Chicken?
No.
Have you ever eaten at
Popeyes once?
I was going to say Pioneer.
He barely had KFC for the first time.
That's true. That's right.
Yeah, I really got to hold up my end of
He
things
doesn't know
here.
what Popeyes is.
Oh my goodness. That's right, because we had to introduce you to soul food.
It's shameful, isn't it? I got a lot of learning to do.
Okay. Stefan, do you need like my card or what? It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640. We're live everywhere in the iHeartRadio app.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
And let me ask you this. Do you think Jimmy is roaming around the White House tonight trying to find a meatloaf to warm himself up on?
I don't think the Carters eat meatloaf.
Who the hell are they? They're only from Georgia. Oh, let me tell you something. I am so sick of Washington and all its works and all them politicians down there and them congressmen and the congressmen. Boy, I'll bet you won't find none of them congressmen signing down their electric blankets tonight. Because if they did, their secretaries would get up and go home. Oh, readers, the Democrats is doing the Democrats, and you put them in there. That's the face you had on you when you come back in the polls. Well, the Democrats' way of running this country is to go tell us all how we ought to make sacrifices. God, they're great on that stuff. But they're all going to have us over the hill to the poorhouse. We ain't going to be able to drive over there because we ain't got no gas, so we're going to have to walk it.
Oh, the Reader's Digest says walking is very good for you.
Oh, ain't that lovely? The Reader's Digest can always put a little joy into poverty.
KFI, Later with Mo Kelly. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app. And I was talking with Mark Ronner during the break. And just to let you know, Mark Ronner, I have seen just about every episode of every Norman Lear show there is. I wouldn't say I have an encyclopedic memory of them, but I remember certain certain sentiments and episodes and storylines. And I just remember that soliloquy from Archie Bunker. So I just said, I got to go find it. And it was, thank goodness, YouTube, it was there.
Hats off. Brilliant cut. Hats off.
And it's so apropos. It still fits today. If I played more of it, he goes into his conspiracy theories. It was prescient. It was almost like predicting the future on steroids.
Oh, Lear was a genius.
Absolutely.
No question.
But we're talking about the DNC and politics more generally. We'll drop in and out if it warrants it, what's going on in Chicago. Something else I want to talk about with regard to Chicago. Kamala Harris, vice president, hasn't had any missteps as of yet, but this is still I wouldn't say a dangerous moment, but I would say it is a delicate moment for the Democratic Party, given the protests which have already started in Chicago. Yes, they're going to be protests. It's not going to be clear whether it's protests just about Gaza or if it's anti-Israel or is it anti-Joe Biden with respect to policy on Israel and Gaza, how that's all going to shake out. But it's more a question of how it's going to be covered and whether it starts to take away any real emphasis on the DNC. If the story becomes more about the protest than the DNC itself, then the Democrats have a huge issue. And there's no real prediction out there as far as which way it will go. You know, protests are unpredictable. Of course, you're going to have provocateurs. Of course, you're going to have agitators. But the only thing I can liken it to, when I was working in my previous radio gig, we went to both the DNC and RNC in 2008. In 2008, it was in Denver. And there were a lot of protesters out there for this, that, and the other. But what they did was the protesters could not get within half a mile of the arena. I mean, yeah, you could protest, but you were so far away from the press and the goings on of the convention, it didn't matter. Now, without seeing the lay of the land in Chicago, I'm pretty sure that they probably did the same thing where you're not getting anywhere near the convention center.
Do you not get the impression from some of the coverage that we've all seen that some in the press are kind of rooting for something like the 68 convention?
Absolutely. No, 100%.
They want to be part of that.
Yes, they want to be able to cover it. I think every reporter, and I'm going to generalize, every reporter, every news person wants to have their own historical moment where they get to be a voice of history in some way.
But they're committing that quantum physics observational fallacy thing by, observing it and being a part of it. You affect the outcome.
Right. You're not supposed to be part of the story. And I think part of it is, what is it? Wish casting, maybe?
Yeah.
I think that's part of it. But it is, I think, fair to acknowledge that is a component of the story. We just don't know whether it's going to be a major part of the story or nothing at all.
I'll tell you what it reminds me of is all the hack journalists that we heard predicting a recession because it would have given them something exciting to report on, and it never happened.
Well, it was a prediction of a recession for more than one presidential election cycle. Now, it is fair to say that we are due for one, and if we were to use history as a guide, if we didn't have a pandemic and we didn't have other factors to artificially prop up our economy for an extended period of time, I think possibly we would have hit a recession. I actually thought there would have been one.
But my point is, I believed, based on the voluminous stuff I consumed, that a lot of reporters were rooting for a recession because they thought that'd be sexier to report on than good news.
Well, let's think about this. There was a time near the end of the Trump administration when the Dow Jones and the stock market actually mattered. It doesn't matter now as an economic indicator, but back then it supposedly mattered, where we had dropped down to 18,000. And that was one point I thought, okay, we might be heading that way. But then, but that was also running parallel to the pandemic. So we had interest rates frozen at zero, which never happens. I mean, never. So you had things working against and working for a recession, if that makes sense.
It does. My point is that I'm seeing more than I ever really have noticed in my life of mainstream big-time journalists trying to put a thumb on the scale because it will benefit them.
Well, I think big-time journalists these days are usually connected to a cable news network. And that, I think, clouds the issue where it's less about journalism and more about the individual, not the outlet.
Yeah, them becoming journalism stars,
yes.
Selling books, getting access to people they didn't have access to before. It's really quite a wonder to behold, and not in a good sense.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't remember in the 1980s or 1970s in which every major journalist had a book that they were selling.
No, you reported the news.
Woodward and Bernstein, I don't think they did their book until way down the road.
I can't answer that. I don't know that.
Well, put it this way. Every major reporter / anchor has a book now. Every single one.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole generation of journalists who were inspired by Woodward and Bernstein. Me, it was Carl Kolchak, the Night Stalker.
What?
We all have our journalism models. Mine was Kolchak.
Well, honestly, for me, I was always a Cronkite fan.
Oh, of course.
If only because he was, and also Jim Gray, because I remember very faintly his call for the Munich Olympics with the Israeli athletes, and that how he handled that live in the moment. And those are the things that just stick with me. It's like, that's a pro. Do you remember that call?
Only in the most skeletal way, but I mean,
it's the one he said they're all gone.
Okay, so you're talking about the kidnapping.
Yes, the Munich Olympics. Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah, that type of journalism where you're dealing with news as it's happening in front of you, and you're trying to put some sort of perspective on something which is it's just completely unprecedented, completely unheard of, and you're trying to keep it together yourself. Mm-hmm. And trying to explain seemingly the inexplicable.
Yeah, historic for sure.
It's later with Mo Kelly. We're waiting around to see when President Joe Biden is going to speak right now. I believe Ashley Biden is on the stage right now, and we know that Joe Biden is going to close out this first night of the DNC. We will have his remarks live when they come.
You're listening to Later with Mo Kelly on demand from KFI AM 640.
It's Later with Mo Kelly. We're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app as we're, I guess, monitoring the DNC right now. Senator Raphael Warnock of Georgia is speaking. Got a long way to go before we get to President Biden. So we'll just keep monitoring it. I made a mistake last segment. I said Jim Gray regarding the Munich Olympics. I meant Jim McKay, but it gets all garbled in my mind. We're talking about broadcast anchors, journalism, how it's changed our expectations of what is news, how we figure out what to believe, what not to believe, an ongoing conversation we've had as far as misinformation, disinformation. Now, when you throw in social media, AI, and the intentional attempts to mislead the public with a lot of these videos, these memes, even Google ads and so forth, it makes it real difficult for anyone to be able to separate truth from fiction. And part of it, that's the design, to keep people confused and unsure. It's like, wait a minute, is that allegation true? Or is that rumor true? Or did that really happen? Did so-and-so really do that 15, 20 years ago? And so you just have a confused, overall uninformed populace. And I'm sorry that it's gotten to this point, because I started tonight talking about when I first fell in love with the American political system as a child. And I remember clearly, distinctly what it was like then. Yes, you had some partisanship, but there was still a spirit of unity moving the country forward. And I'm not romanticizing it. I remember what it was like when you had Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill and President Ronald Reagan, who vehemently disagreed in a policy sense, but they weren't disagreeable, and they were able to get some sort of legislation through. It seems like now, if you don't have a president of a certain party and total control of both houses, the country can't move forward. And it didn't used to be that way. Now, whether we'll ever get back to a functioning government, I don't know. Probably not in my lifetime. Mark Rauner's a little younger than me. He might live long enough to see it. Definitely Stefan, but I'm not going to be here to see it.
My plan is to go out before you. I'm working on it.
I try to tell people all the time, I am a confirmed cynic. And being a confirmed cynic, I can't put too much faith in anybody or anybody's party, elected official, or anything like that. Now, there are some deal breakers. There's some politicians I can never support under any circumstances. But I don't limit myself. I vote for Republicans and Democrats. But I am a person who's really big on decency, dignity, and decorum.
What?
I know. Imagine that. Respect for the office. And put it this way. I hold people of higher office to higher standards. Why? Because the responsibilities are greater. I'm not going to judge a presidential candidate as on the same level that I would someone who's running to be fry cook at McDonald's. Sorry. I know that sounds really dismissive and condescending, but it's true. I don't look at those positions equally.
I have to choose my words very carefully here. So let me focus on what you said about history. You were talking about the 68 convention and LBJ stepping down. To your point about how much things have changed, and what you implied was how far through the looking glass we are right now. Just think about Watergate, how little that was. A couple break-ins and a cover-up. Compare that to what's happened in the last half a dozen years.
Well, think about the cover-up, talking about Richard Nixon, and it wasn't the cover-up. Well, it was a cover-up, but it wasn't until we knew that there were White House tapes that everything fell apart. Because up until that point, the cover-up was covering.
Right, but what I'm saying is that compared to what we've seen just recently, that's like a hangnail.
Oh, yeah, and that happened over the course of many months and years. A political news cycle now could be 5 or 6 minutes. What we were discussing last week, like, for example, a month ago, we were talking about a presidential assassination attempt and how that was leading into the RNC and how seemingly at that point, all the momentum was with former President Trump. That was just a month ago. And here we are and the world looks completely different. Does it mean that Kamala Harris is going to win? Absolutely not. I'm just saying how the political process has evolved in such a short time. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had dirty politics. Let's not be under any illusions here. I mean, we remember that Nixon played a role in delaying peace in Vietnam, to put a thumb on the election.
Well, we always talk about Nixon and we kind of skip over Spiro Agnew, who was convicted on completely unrelated bribery charges while he was in office. And people think like it had to do with Watergate. No, it had nothing to do with Watergate.
No. He was dirty all in his own right.
Right. On his own, having nothing to do with Nixon. And because I guess, we had two different vice presidents in one administration because of Nixon and not having to do with Nixon.
But think about how Nixon stepped down after Goldwater told him, if you don't, you're going to get it. That is a different universe than we live in today.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything even comparable to think that you have a sitting president. There was a scandal, and then the Republicans went to him and said, if you do not resign, we will impeach you and then remove you from office, because there was enough support back then on both sides of the aisle
for this unethical, probably illegal thing that you just did. Instead of like, well, just brazen it out. We got this.
Just ride it out.
Yeah.
And then to think all this time later, we're debating, air quotes, presidential immunity, when, if not for the pardon of Gerald Ford, most likely Richard Nixon would have been prosecuted.
Historians that I have been reading say that was one of the biggest mistakes in U.S. history, pardoning Nixon.
Well, Gerald Ford was saying, and the same argument which is being made today with former President Trump, it was, quote unquote, for the good of the nation. And I don't know if the nation benefited because they didn't prosecute Richard Nixon because I think it set forth a dubious precedent that we're seeing rear its head today.
It's like how, if you don't rub your dog's nose in something right afterwards, they think it's okay to keep doing it.
Imagine that. It's Later with Mo Kelly. KFI AM 640, we're live everywhere on the iHeartRadio app.
Critical thinkers want it.
KFI.
And KOST HD2.
Los Angeles, Orange County.
Live everywhere.